we want to thank you for joining us in another show in Black August. August just continues to give us incredible insights into the ancestor sacrifices that connect the dots to where we are today and how we got here and the things that we are dealing with today. So nothing is absolutely new under the sun. Based on the wisdom of the ancestors through Dr. Charles Alexander and who's joining us live from an undisclosed location in Illinois, and the Mike Jones. I'm attorney Larry Fields, and we hope that attorney Gerald Christmas joins us later. We will discuss today the Civil War in context of the overall character of what occurred. In addition to that, we're going to address some of the possible solutions. We spoke about solutions last week. We did not get there to the extent that we'd like to, but we plan on giving you a little more background information on how we got to where we are, why we where we are and how to address it. So, with no further ado, Dr. Alexander and the Mike Jones, if you all would give us a general understanding of why the American Civil War occurred and the aspect of the inclusion of the three-fifths compromise that's placed in the Constitution, the reason, the where, the why, and the impact that it has had.
Good morning. Um, so as we talked about last week, we have to start with, first and foremost, we always have to start with from the premise that this this colony that became the United States was and was always it was a capitalist venture in and of itself. And we didn't just happen to get here. We had the enslaved Africans bound for Central America, hijacked by some pirates, brought to the colony, and sold to the governor of the colony. That's how we got here. And within about 60 or 70 years of coming, they had codified the Virginia slave codes, which became a model for everything, for all of the states. And so slavery becomes the, this huge source of wealth that is the wealth of the nation. It is the key to individual wealth, slavery, and things connected to it. And people from what we call the South, or that eventually became the Confederacy, they didn't want to pay taxes on their profits. They didn't want to contribute to the nation. They only wanted to take care of their individual states, and they thought of themselves as separate and apart. And each faction, each region, kind of was alike in that regard. And so they wanted to secede. Ultimately, they wanted a, well, before they wanted to secede, they were trying to figure out how to dole out representatives. And one of the problems that the South had is that they had more enslaved Africans than they had white folks. And so But their solution was simply to count everybody, including enslaved Africans. And then the North said, well, you can't count them and they not have any rights. You can't count them and they be enslaved and property. And so, and you can't count them. And the other point of the North, which was probably the great contention, is that you can't count them and not pay tax on them because they are property. So you have to pay taxes, which was, again, a huge part of the problem. And so they made a bargain and they said, okay, so we won't count everybody. We won't allow you to count everybody. You'll count 3 out of every 5 will be counted towards your apportionment. And you will also pay taxes on that same amount. And so that's what was agreed to, and that's what gave the power to the South in a political sense to even be able to compete with the North, with the North at that time at a political level. And so it literally ceded a significant amount of power to the slaveocracy.
And this was prior to the Civil War. So this is the agreement that they made during the construction of the Constitution.
Correct.
Mike Jones, what are the general aspects of this agreement that jump out at you with respect to Black people at that time, the rights that we had or thereof, and the fomenting of what we understand and we still call, and I think it's a misnomer, but these people do a lot of projecting in this place that they call the United States. It's almost like these individuals calling themselves such and such for liberty when they're trying to erode voting rights at the same time. But these states are anything but united. These states they still have the DNA of slave states and so quote unquote freed states. But uh, that's a bad journalist question that I just posed to you because it's comment and question 5 minutes ago. But I'd like to get your thoughts on that on that matter. I can't hear you, Mr. Jones, and I need to hear you. I cannot hear you, and I need to hear you. Uh-oh, we do have a problem. I'm reading your lips. I still can't hear you. This is, know, still can't hear you. We have got to get this straight. We're suffering some technical difficulties with Mr. Jones right now, and he is giving us chapter and verse that we cannot hear. He's going to get off and come back on, and we are going to await you doing that. But I think something's important that we need to mention at this time, Dr. Alexander, and that's the posture of
Bingo.
Abraham. Okay, there we go.
All right, then. That's what happens with old guys and technology, man. Okay.
You're like Miles. You stay current. So that is that's a wonderful thing.
And that's why he's at the top of my pantheon as a musician and as the artist. But I do have to say, as a passing somebody with a little bit more than a passing interest in jazz, I liked early Miles more than late Miles. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought he was better early. So with that in mind, late Mike is showing up. Okay,
I understand. I
but no,
understand.
let me say, because Charles really for a while has talked about the 3/5 thing, and I for me, as we exchanged notes yesterday, it truly brought into focus something that, for example, the 3/5 uh, compromise was only about representation and taxes. It more representation than taxes, and because the South had more enslaved people than they had white people, and all the white people in the colonies were in the North. Okay, and some of those were free states, some of them wasn't, but that's where all the people was. So the South, if they had joined the Union that only had counted white folks for political representation, they wouldn't have had any, and they were the most wealthy colonies, by the way. Okay, so this was before the Industrial Revolution, so the wealth was located in the South, because basically off of slavery. So we have misread or misunderstood the whole thing. We keep talking about the Constitution calls us 3/5 of a people. No, it didn't. The Constitution didn't call us shit. Okay. We have been defined as property before the American Revolution and after the Revolution. So we were not a consideration in any of the debate. So this was about white folks trying to figure out how white folks got represented in this new government, since they wasn't going to have a king. So we shouldn't, and I'm going where Charles State lives now. We got to quit tripping off the Constitution and the 3/5, because that ain't really about shit. But
Let me ask you this, Mike. What if it was 1-to-1? So what if they
with the North,
referred to
but the North
what?
wouldn't have gone for that shit. I
I
mean,
know,
the whole.
I know it, but fictitiously, if it was 1-to-1, would we have been better off? All if they counted all Negroes as one individual for the aspects of creating the representative for the House of Representatives
For what? For white
precincts.
people?
Yes,
No, we wouldn't have been any better off. And in fact, as Charles was talking, I was just thinking, for the purposes of the census, they did count all of us. Okay, enslaved black people got counted in the census. Okay, because the census is about counting the people that are here, and we were the people that were here, but legally defined as property for the purposes of politics and law. Okay, so this is a real bifurcated thing. But here's the point that I really want to make. Our ignorance of American history makes us keep making the same mistakes with white America going forward. The United States has a creation myth story about some flawed white men who created this great idea, but you have to keep improving on it. No, that's not the story. This country was founded primarily by white men who were enslavers to free themselves from the political sovereignty of the English king, okay, or the English government. Now that's what it was about. They just put it like this: they didn't want to send any of that their money.
everybody, my son's with me here. Just want to say hello this morning to everybody. Yeah, yeah.
Good
Yeah.
morning,
Am I
sir.
right? How's
They
it
say
going? Yeah,
they say good morning. How's it going? Yeah,
yeah.
but yeah, yeah.
So, so what I would suggest that once you accept that reality, then there was a permanent premise to this country that we ignore. White folks ignore it because they don't want to have to confront it. And why the hell we ignore it, I don't know. But that is, this country was founded as a patriarchal white male caste system, period. And the top of the caste were white men with wealth who owned property. White men who didn't own property were further down, and we wasn't even accounted for, except as inventory. Okay? So that's America. And here's the point. At no point in time since then has the descendants of those enslavers who founded the country on the premise of white male superiority have ever refuted or repudiated that assumption. There has never been a time, whether it was the Civil War, World War II, the Civil Rights, that there has never been a time where that assumption has been officially rejected. In fact, they say, well, this is all of our history and they were moving forward. Well, it is part of the historical record, but from the standpoint of the political order, the cultural order, the sociology of a society is founded on some kind of value system. And at some point, you have to either you accept or you repudiate things in the past that might have been historically justified. Whether they were or not, they happened. And as you move forward, you have to address the past as it reflects it. For example, the Germans repudiated Nazism.
They had a reconciliation period.
Yeah, but before reconciliation, they first had to repudiate. They had to accept their crime against humanity, and then they had to repudiate it.
That's correct.
At that point, you can talk about reconciliation. We talk about reconciliation, and ain't nobody repudiated or moved on from nothing. They still holding on to Confederate statues, and all of these are monuments to that white male superiority social order. And so the question you have to ask is not about those white folks, but these other white folks. Okay? So if you thought it was wrong, then you can say, but there's nothing you can do about the past. That's a true story.
Let me
Yeah.
ask this. Let me ask this, Mike Jones and Dr. Alexander. What other white folks? What other white folks? Because we have a mythological viewpoint that the Civil War was based on fleeing the slaves and emancipation. And we don't characterize it properly as that being an issue that was inserted when the Union Army needed the use of Black troops to win. But that was not on the table. At the time, in fact, it was August, I want to say, of 1783, when Lincoln met with Frederick Douglass and others and told them, hey, Black and white folks should not be together. We need to find a place to send and all these Black folks back to. So this notion that this was to free the slaves, does two things, in my opinion. It deifies some folks that shouldn't be deified, and it fails to give credit to the Black folks that negotiated and put emancipation on the agenda during the Civil War, because it was not there initially.
But Larry, my point would be the historical record doesn't say that. Okay, I mean, the reason Charles can say what he said, the reason I can say what I said, is the historical record. You know, I mean, this again, this is all in broad daylight. The historical record doesn't say that, but when you believe, what is it?
It doesn't say what, Mike?
No, that the Civil War was about slavery. I mean, it doesn't say that.
Well, but that's it does not say that. But that is the common assumption that you have.
Well, that's the fallacy of folks. That's what, you know. That's like That's like some adult saying, "I believe in Santa Claus."
And
Okay,
to
well,
you and to me, but there's still, and I think that when we get, I think as we deconstruct this self-loathing that has permeated through our community, that allows us to act in a manner against our interests, there are a number of bricks in that wall. And I think that one of those bricks is that is what happened, in my opinion. So, but go ahead, Mike.
But I agree with you on that. But the reason they can believe that is because they believe the cornerstone assumption, which is somehow this is a great idea, but it has to keep being improved and extended. And if you look at the record and you look at the men who put this together, they had an idea, a permanent idea, and the permanent idea didn't include us. Okay, so before you get to the Civil War, you got to start with the Constitution. Okay, if you start wrong, naturally you're gonna get the Civil War wrong because you got the Constitution, you got the beginning wrong. So 70 years later, it's hard to get it right. So you always have to go back to the beginning to rectify your when you're lost in a map. A map doesn't stop you from getting lost, but it does tell you when you are lost. And the way you find your way forward is to look at the map and say, well, this is where we started. Where did we go wrong? But you can't start from where you lost and try to figure it out. You got to start from where you was started from and where was I trying to go. So our thinking about us is flawed. Okay, and here is, and even some of a lot of us at our best, our thinking is flawed from a logic standpoint. And Charles opened with this, we jumped to the argument and never examined the predicate. So we're having this black debate about inclusion and voting rights and all that kind of stuff, and it's based on assumptions that ain't true. Okay, and the note that I passed to you guys yesterday, I'll restate it for this. It's just to show you what we don't know. The 15th Amendment gives black men the right to vote. The 19th Amendment gave black women the right to vote when women got the right to vote. Because when we got the right to vote as black men, women still couldn't vote. So the 15th and 19th Amendments give you the right to vote. The 14th Amendment, Section 1, is the Equal Protection Clause. It said no state can make a law fundamentally that undermines the citizenhood, the personhood of an American citizen. We, as a result of the 13th Amendment, were free. And I and the progeny of our ancestors were free because we were born or naturalized in the United States. So at this point, per the founding document, you are now a person with all the rights and privileges of any other person. So
Is that similar? Is that similar to birthright citizenship,
yeah,
which
well,
which is on the
Yeah,
table right now?
that is the
but
foundation of it.
that's the
Okay,
foundation. Yeah, yeah,
okay.
that is the foundation of it. You're right, Charles. But Larry, here's what I'm saying. So the 14th Amendment says that the states don't have the right to deny you any part of your citizenship, any of your rights and privileges. There any law by any state that said you were black, adult, male in the 1800s, by the early 20th century, women, any state that prohibited you from voting was violating the Constitution. There was no law that they could pass that was constitutional. So the federal government has the authority based on the Constitution, because the other thing that the 10th Amendment says is that these are the laws of the federal government has this responsibility, this authority that's in the founding document as amended, and where it's unclear, the states can have priority or the people. But so in the case of protecting your personhood, your citizenship, that's a federal responsibility per the Constitution, which means you don't need a goddamn voting rights bill to ensure. So if somebody tells you, well, we got to pass a voting rights bill, no, you don't. All you have to fucking do is enforce the Constitution. Now Trump has got National Guards, but when Eisenhower, when the governor of Arkansas said the Little Rock Nine ain't going to school, Eisenhower said, "Oh yes, they are." Okay, now he wasn't no Dr. King liberal. He was the president of the United States. He could have been the Massachusetts. He said, "You don't get to tell me what the Supreme Court that they can't do what they just said." So he mobilized the army and sent them there. When James Meredith was going to roll into law school in Mississippi, Kennedy didn't have a voting rights act. He had a civil rights bill. He had the goddamn Constitution, and he sent the fucking army. Okay, so to this day, now Trump is doing a lot of shit like that unauthorized because the Constitution doesn't give him that authority. But it requires the federal government to do what Kennedy and Eisenhower did. Required. They didn't have to ask Congress. They didn't have to pass a law. The Supreme Court said it's illegal to do that. They got a legal right to be there. You can't stop them. If you try to stop them, I'll show up. Now, it ain't no more complicated than that. It's hard, but it ain't complicated.
You know, we often assume that our freedom is based on the benevolence of others, this benevolence disposition. And I want to talk a little bit about what we had to do with attaining our freedom and ridding ourselves from chattel slavery. Dr. Alexander, can you add to support or dissent to that argument?
No, I agree with the argument, and it all rests with with the combined implications of an inferior education with the lack of interest or motivation for too many of us to engage in just self inquiry and independent study otherwise. And so that leads us to this place where we just kind of fill in the blanks, and we fill in the blanks with things that are the least, presumably the least cause the least amount of stress, that are least taxing on the mind. You don't really literally have to think about it, so that's the unfortunate piece. And so as has been the kind of the level, kind of that foundational point is that this thing was established for the reasons that was established, and it needed cheap and or free labor, and we became the cheap enslaved labor. So, and yes, even from the earliest times, there was one or two people, or maybe even a couple of people, a few people, black folks, black men, who were able to to obtain property, and did in fact hold enslaved Africans as well. But that's just literally just a small minority, and but that too becomes one of the strategies that we employ when we're trying to kind of soften the blow of our experience here. We find what are actually, like we overgeneralize the, things like the ownership of uh, the ability for some black folks to have owned slaves. There are some of us who find some measure of pride in that, under the thought that somehow, that we brave the times to be able to establish that, and then we start with the whole, they ain't want them to have that, and it was da 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 da, that they come they coming for you type of thing. But these are all the kind of fantasies that we have and that we use in order to help us to ultimately feel like, we really belonged, and it was just a moral error on the part of the white person, or the white man, to enslave us for 200 years. It just kind of happened, and the good people were trying to make a way, and blah 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 blah. And then it gets even worse, because you got X number of folks who who are thankful for the transatlantic slave, because the transatlantic slave trade, because had it not been for that, we would still be barefoot and illiterate in Africa. So we got those black folks who think that, and so which also again is kind of sourced with this kind of perpetual state of ignorance that many of us find ourselves in, because this information is readily available.
Yes, and in fact, to prove your point about the information being available, I went back and pulled a book that I think does a great job of outlining some of those issues we spoke about: Black Ghost of Empire, The Long Death of Slavery and the Failure of Emancipation. And, to your point about what we have had to endure and what we did it, in understanding our role in it. I think it's important for us to know what we were up against so we can quit placing people in authority and deity positions that they shouldn't be in. So here's a couple of excerpts from the book. It states by November 1861, Lincoln proposed a gradual emancipation plan for slave owner reparations in the border state of Delaware. The plan would have delayed final emancipation to 1867 and paid $400 per enslaved person in reparations to slave owners. The bill failed, however. But what is important for us to understand is that a group of three commissioners dispersed a total of $900,000, approximately 28 million in today's using historical inflation rates, to DC slave owners over 2 years after the British model. In addition to that, I want folks to understand, because we have this notion of slaves being just these agreeable individuals to slavery. Well, that's not the case. Masses of Black people were pushing Lincoln's hand on government action to end the institution of slavery. As curtains of war fell across the North and South, draping the Appalachians and the Mississippi watershed, tens of thousands of Black women, men, and children began fleeing the plantations to the picket guards of Union camps, asking for refuge from their slave owners. Some Union generals, such as Henry Wagner Halleck of New York, insisted on returning enslaved people to their owners, thereby upholding the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Others, like Benjamin Butler, a Massachusetts lawyer, and later Oliver Howard, William Sherman, and John Fremont, among others, put fugitives to work in Union camps. Often enough, however, they also turned fugitives away when space was lacking, surrendering them to their fate in the rebel Confederacy. Butler's decision to categorize fugitives not as persons, but as contraband, prompted the Congress to pass the Confiscations Act of 1861 and 1862, clarifying that Black fugitives were not to be returned to rebellion owners. Now, we seem to think that we agreed the whole time, and these folks, this has been a war that our ancestors have been fighting since we got over here. And we need to understand.
There is Charles. I want to hear from you on this. One of the things that we kind of argue, but we never again articulate the premise that if I asked you all the question, what's the most traded commodity in history? What would your answer be?
Labor?
Black labor.
Not well, people. Period. Human trafficking is as old as human civilization. Okay. What I think we're arguing is there's a white argument that say, well, slavery has always existed.
Mm-hmm.
I think American slavery was uniquely pernicious and evil, and then has a mitigating effect on society and culture going forward. So the question that we also need to articulate is why this is uniquely pernicious. Okay, uniquely pernicious. Now, out of a whole history of human trafficking, ever since there's any anthropological record of human beings, okay, this has gone on. It has meant different things at different times, but to my knowledge, nobody commercialized it in the manner that white men in America did, in terms of it being literally property, literally human beings as property, not human beings, because I captured you and rather than kill you, I put you to work, okay? And at some point, I might give you your freedom, or you could buy it or whatever. But this was a uniquely commercial proposition, and they sustained it for 300 years, 350 years, in fact. So from the time the first Europeans set foot on what we now call the North American continent to 1865, there was a unique way of dealing with slavery in America that was a function of them being white and us being black. And even when you eliminated slavery as a legal process, they replaced it with Jim Crow, which became America's apartheid system before there was apartheid. So again, we're back to this intentionality of what has happened to us, and I'm bringing that word up. It's because too much of our political argument to ourselves, our advocacy to ourselves, our argument to white America is something that Charles alluded to earlier. Like this was some goddamn accident. Okay, it just happened to happen. Didn't nobody mean it. You know how people mess up sometimes. Sorry about that. And literally going to my point that I opened with earlier, there has yet to be a time where any generations of Americans actually looked at their history and said what the Germans said about Jews in Germany and Nazism and the Holocaust. Always wrong about that. We have to condemn that part of who we are. I would suggest that if you look at American culture and popular history, Gone with the Wind was the biggest movie of all time when it was put together, and it stayed there for a long time. Was really a glorification of what the Confederacy was, and kind of made it tragic that it had to go away. Okay, I know they had, but that's part of it.
And when it played at the Fox, we were lined up going down there like it was the opening of school day.
But here's my point. You can't find a movie in Germany that will glorify Hitler and the Nazis. You can't find a statue to them. You ain't got the Daughters of Hitler's Army trying to build monuments. You can't find none of that shit. They literally repudiate everything. They recognize, accepted they did it, and said it was fundamentally wrong. And as the generation that's followed that, we stand in condemnation of that. And our pledge is to move from that and do better. You have yet to have an American generation, a white American generation, make that statement. And we keep messing with them like they do.
My point is that we've been so inculcated in this system and miseducated that we and want to be a part of this system, that we act as if it is appropriate for us to celebrate that foolishness too. Because I know when it was premiered, I shouldn't even say premiered, but brought back and played at the Fox, folks that should know better were taking their children to celebrate that. So that is, we have, generally as you all holding us accountable, but I think we, today, again, I'm going to say we've got to do a better job of identifying what is toxic to us and ridding ourselves of it as
Larry,
well.
That's my point in making the argument that we focus. Charles's counseling for the last 4 or 5 years is now beginning to take hold. we focus too much on them and not enough on us, without benefit of education or license. When you're in a toxic relationship and things need to change, the therapy, the counseling is about you make a change and everything else has to change.
Absolutely.
Because you can't change them, but you can
Absolutely.
change you. And the minute you change you, everything else has to change.
Absolutely.
Did I
But too
get that
often
right?
time.
Did I get that right, Dr. Alexander?
That is it.
As we transition to Dr. Alexander, I just want to quote Dr. Greg Carr saying, "Too many of us love our masters. That's our problem."
Well, that's an abusive relationship, and that's what happens in abusive. So, matter of fact, you got a whole lot of work, scientific work. I mean, none of this ought to be a mystery. If you just take a step back, one of the, we talked. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, we all put together a reading list, and I mentioned this, but the two books, the one author, but two books of his that come together that I'd have everybody black read is Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, and Studies in the Dying Colonialism. Because it was over 50 years ago when I read them. But, and he's talking about Algeria. He ain't even talking about us. In fact, Fanon didn't even think what he was talking about, writing about, really applied to us in America. But yes, it does when you're looking at it from where we're sitting. And literally, it captures better than anything else what's wrong with us. And he ain't even talking about us. He was talking about Algerians and the French. But it's the same dynamic.
And when he deals with the women from Martinique, boy, I tell you, he goes to work on it.
Yeah.
Dr. Alexander, I'd like to hear your
Mhm.
comments on the at this point.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's our context or our context and our premise remains off. And so everything emanating from that remains off for us. And so in much the same way that we don't understand, or because we don't understand, let's switch it to that, because we don't understand, or accept the premise that we were here for the reason that we've ever been here, and that was free labor. We misinterpret everything else. So, like, we could skip all of the efforts that were made and contemplated and debated on both sides about where the free African should be. So you had the establishment in the colonies of the I forget the name of the institution, but the purpose of the institution was to take the free Africans and take them back to Africa, which is ultimately what resulted in the establishment of Liberia. But so we go from this point where the colonial the colonial government, and then ultimately the United States government, all the way up to Lincoln is trying to figure out what to do with us, because Lincoln don't want us here. Um, he is on record of saying that we can't live together, and if we were to live together, it dictates that there be a superior and inferior, and that he was adamant that white folks should be in the superior. So these were all just stated facts, right? And so he considered sending black folks to Panama. He considered and he did send folks to kind of get a idea about if there was any efficacy in the plan. He sent like it was like 500 black folks to an island off the coast of Haiti, and the plan failed. This was prior to the Civil War, because it's like, we can't deal with all of these folks. You know, they didn't have the financial will to send us en masse. But so we go from that to in the 1917, 1918, or what have you, when Marcus Garvey arrives here. We then have Negroes arguing that he is crazy for even considering that any of us go back to Africa. We were living in an apartheid, segregated society, fighting amongst ourselves about the ills of being separatists, and we were living separated by law. I don't know that there's a point in which we were more crazy in terms of how we interpreted what was going on. We were fighting. We had a faction of the black misleadership class that was fighting Marcus Garvey about separation, and ultimately fighting the Nation of Islam over separation, when we were living in this place separated. It doesn't make sense. There's no way you can make it make sense.
Charles, let me ask you a question. Because this is an absurd argument properly framed. So what do you say about the people who make an argument like that on behalf of themselves?
That is the prime example of psychological misorientation. This is ultimately the so, like, you got to appreciate this frame of reference in order to actually appreciate Dr. King's point. I fear that we're integrating into a burning house. At a point, you got to give up the moral imperative. This whole moral thing, that ain't what moves these people. And they're going to ultimately do what they want to do. They're going to come up with a way to be able to do exactly what they want to do. We live right now in a period of time where they are doing exactly what they want to do.
And Charles, I would say that ties back to the beginning of my argument, that the founding operating premise of the country is white male privilege. That has never changed. Everything else is just the mechanics of how it manifests itself in any particular historical epoch. But fundamentally, the premise is always operated with that as the premise. And with that as the premise, we're by definition defined out of the scenario.
Out of the scenario. I mean, and again,
when you know the rules of the game, you can maneuver.
I agree with that.
Or not play. Or choose not to play.
Right.
And again, this is how how off our reasoning is that you got black commentators likening Trump's behavior right now to Nazi Germany or South Africa, when in fact each of those governments looked to the United States to implement what they implemented. And so when we are going for, whatever we perceive the most heinous acts to ever occur, we always find a way, like white folks, to go external to this place. Ain't none of what happened nowhere worse than this.
When you were Goebbels' North Star.
I mean,
You were Nazi German's minister of information's North Star was to when he got off that map you talked about, Mike. When he got off track, he said, "What would the United States do with the American Negro?" And that's how he played everything.
Right.
The
Wait a
eugenics
minute.
movement didn't start in Nazi Germany. It
Right.
started here.
Wait a minute.
And Germany borrowed the science to do
Wait a
the
minute.
same.
And Charles, Larry, Charles, here's what I would say about that. That the only thing Nazi Germany had on America when it came to genocide was efficiency. They did as much damage in a shorter time frame. It took Americans, white men in America, it took them a couple of 100 years to erase an indigenous people. The Germans did it in 6 years, and the Israelis are putting them to shame because they have literally, in the process of wiping out the Palestinian population in about 2 years.
Yes, with the assistance of these
Of the
same
United
people
States,
we keep acting like ain't these people. These
Right.
You mean the world's democracy is doing that?
Yes, it's like, I mean, and so we keep finding, we like intentionally look for this other model. It's like displaced anger, and like we have to. This got to be somewhere else. It's projection. It's not us. It's not this thing. This is something that happens somewhere else. Like white folks who don't know that Castro's a friend of Black Revolution wherever it manifests in the world. Living in this system, calling some other leader dictator. At the same time, we can't do jack. Yeah. And so we're fighting, we're fighting for whatever it is we need to have during the lifetime of Castro, and we're pointing at him saying he's oppressive. It's like this thing is it just, that part it does efficiently. This thing, its most efficient weapon is propaganda. That's what this thing got. And this thing it uses it to folks believing that the United States got into World War II because of the Holocaust. No, but we be looking for this good thing.
Let me go back real quick to a point that you made earlier about Lincoln, and I don't want to go back too far, but I do want to go back, and I want to read once again from the book Black Ghost of Empire, sort of um, summates the statement that you made, and it reads, as it became clear in the mid 1862. By mid 1862, that the Black population of the South was fighting its way to freedom, Lincoln again explored opportunities for Black immigration to Central America, to Panama, and to Colombia. In August of 1862, at a meeting called by Lincoln with Black representatives, including Frederick Douglass, Lincoln said, "You and we are different races. It affords a reason why we should be separated." Pointing to the devastating war, he shook his head and repeated, "It is better for both of us, therefore, to be separated." Yet a month later, September, Lincoln seemed to change course. He issued a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, effectively declaring all enslaved people held by rebels to be free, while also, at the same time, protecting slave ownership in the border states and among planters who pledged loyalty to the Union. The proclamation permitted the continuation of slavery in Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri, as in any section of the Confederacy that accepted the North's authority.
Yes. So you have to. So like you got to take that. You got to take that meeting. You got to take his statements, and then you got to fast forward to Frederick Douglass. You know, in his speech regarding Lincoln, is decidedly their president. He's not our president. He did some stuff, you know, but for him, like that's the first, like so we credit Carl Bell. I mean not Carl Bell.
Derek Bell.
Derek Bell. We credit Derek Bell with interest convergence, but it's really Frederick Douglass. It's Frederick Douglass that tells like even emancipation ain't about you, Joker. It's about him. It's about them. It just ended up being in our interests, right? He was always that guy, but unless you know those points that you just reiterated, Larry, you know, unless you know that the guy was actively seeking to ship us off, and then there's these, so like if you read the color conventions, there's this ongoing, you know, argument and tension, you know, from the latter 1600s into the you know, throughout the 17s and the 18s. Like there's always this debate amongst Black folks about should we stay here or should we go? Again, Frederick Douglass was arguing with some of these cats, like, we gotta stay here. But when folks was going to Canada, Frederick Douglass didn't want folks just going to Canada. And there was a lot of folks who just didn't want folks going to Canada, at least not the free folks. They all in on helping and facilitating Canada, the access to Canada for the, you know, for the self-emancipating, but they didn't want, there was a faction that didn't want free Blacks to leave because we felt like if we leave, there's nobody to advocate on behalf of the enslaved, right? So, and we might have had some who wanted to stay because they felt that, you know, casting their lot in life with white folks was going to be good for them. But there was a revolutionary position within staying on the front end that was really about, if we go, who's here to advocate for the enslaved? And that's why they stayed. But if you don't understand any of that stuff, then you continue to believe that that Lincoln too was, you know, he was just a little misguided, and you know he needed to be moved. So you convince yourself to believe that, you know, you convince yourself to believe that Kennedy didn't know what was going on in the South until they start seeing the news representations of folks getting blown away with water hoses, that people in the North had no idea what was going on in the South. Too many of us need to believe these narratives, Because and even now, you know, Trump done got these people. No, it's the other way around. These people done got Trump. You know, these people exist. This is what's here. You know, he is not the exception. He's the rule.
He is a manifestation of their existence.
Absolutely.
Okay, because without them, there could be no Trump. And if you look at American history, there are Trump characters constantly evolving.
They always pop up.
Yeah, they never go away. And Charles, as you were just describing us writ large, I think maybe we need to make the scale smaller, and rather than talk about us, America, and white folks, we need to talk about people in abusive relationships. Why does she stay with him? Or, you know, heck, he said, well, he beat her up, and she said, well, he just got carried away. He loves me. We love each other. So she stays there and get her ass kicked.
Well, I mean, that's what you're talking about respectability politics at its worst.
But that's what
That's
I mean.
that's all. That's what we are. That is it.
But
And
Larry, I'm suggesting, not arguing. I'm suggesting.
No. I think I'm agreeing with you. I'm
Okay.
agreeing with you 100%, because that's all respectability politics is because they put the onus on the victim every time. If they
Right.
just wouldn't wear shower caps in the airport, if they just didn't wear pajamas out in public, if they just didn't play their music so loud, there would be no redlining. There would be equal rights. They would. I mean, it's just foolishness. And
But
it is, and I think that it is one of a part of that is a failure to diagnose how tenuous your middle class existence is in this country. And you think that you can insulate yourself by talking about the quote unquote antisocial behaviors of others and take credit for your adjacency or to the empire based on your own behavior. And it is a false reality.
But I think the other piece that we have to acknowledge, well, for some of us is realize. We have to realize, and then for others who know it, they just got to acknowledge it. They already know it, and that is, again, we've always had, you know, we've always had the Judas amongst us. That too. So you know, all shapes of the enemy have morphed, and so that threat from within has always existed as well. You know, it could be argued that part of how we end up in this situation is fundamentally predicated on the threat from within.
So
But
that was my point about Fanon and black skins, white masks. So it's literally that, but he's talking about the Algerians and the French. But literally, he's describing us in America on every page. So I was even thinking, using it, almost using it as an analogy or a metaphor. Say, read this and tell me what you think about that. Does it remind you of anything?
Does it remind you of anything?
Yeah, does it remind you? You understood that? Now, does that
Pattern
remind you of
recognition.
anything? Huh?
Pattern recognition once again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, what good teachers do is take something that you can understand to explain something that you're confused about. And then if they're taught you doing a good enough job of teaching you to think critically, then you can make the transfer.
That's
You
why
get to
Jesus
say,
used parables. That's why
right,
Jesus used
few
parables.
parables, right.
And that's why we struggle with Jesus' parables. That's why we struggle with, and why we struggle with uh, metaphor and pattern recognition. Or yeah, so we struggle with parables and metaphor because we struggle with pattern recognition, and we struggle with pattern recognition because it's been illegal for us to learn in the United States longer than we've been free.
Right.
And so, like, we don't accept those fundamental kind of premises. And
Yeah,
so, and so you can't do the pattern recognition because you don't have the fund of information necessary to retrieve and then manipulate with your working memory to do the compare and contrast.
Charles,
But who understands that?
let's stay with that just a moment, because you just triggered a thought, maybe, and I think we metaphorically speaking, I think we become soft as hospital cotton. So, and I think that's why we're getting our ass kicked on a regular basis. But put that to the side for a minute. We need to be tougher minded, more internally tough. But given the historical record, is this about as good as we could be in this limited time? I mean, because we're talking about other situations where they should have, that to get to here took a couple of, to produce that took a couple of 100 years of this other stuff, and we talking about instant coffee or microwave shit. How come, if you, I started segregated schools. Okay, when I went to kindergarten, it was a year before Brown. Okay, so that's my lived experience. Segregation, Jim Crow, my lived experience. So you really, but I got my two youngest grandchildren just started college. So the real question is, how are they processed? Who do they become? And they're going to be processing white America in a much different space than we did, because the white hegemony is out of gas. Okay, it ain't enough white people, and the only way they can maintain it is to do what they're doing now, and that is oppress white people. Okay, that the reason we were so could be easily oppressed is because when we were here for most of our time, the country was 85% white. So shit, we was an afterthought to most white folks. Now, in order to maintain this white hegemony, you got to actually put your foot in white people's ass. Okay, you gotta start telling white women you gotta have babies. This white folks, you can't think of like that. So in order to oppress us and maintain their white male patriarchy, they now got to oppress everybody white, because they can't afford no dissent anymore. Because if the country is about 53% identifies as white, women make up a little more than half of the population of any demographic that they're in. They're a little over half of the population of America, and that ratio holds out across all demographics. That means white men are only 25% of the American population. In an economy that's globally connected and requires 300 million people to operate it and maintain it. They've lost the war. Now, that don't mean that the ship is going to sink quietly, but they can't now. And the real problem that is as I look at this now through this lens, not today, but I've been thinking about this, that it's the problem with white people not knowing what to do with Trump. Because they ain't never seen a white guy like that treating them like that. Now they seen it with us, and like all our Hispanic brothers thought that they was gonna be cool and shit. Sit your brown ass down right next to me. I held your seat for you. I didn't. They wanted to take it away. I said, no, the nigga gonna be back. Don't worry about it. He coming back. Okay, but so the real question is, if you 17 now, 25 now, how you processing America, and how you gonna think about it when you get 50? Okay, that'll be the interesting. If after going through this, how you gonna think about it at 40 or 50, when it's even less white people and less white men?
And you just, again, you look at it from those perspectives, and you were referencing, so like the Latino who thought it was going to be blah blah blah, but it's really this, that we even get, we get perplexed that folks come here and also align, with white power and white supremacy. It's like, how can that not make sense to you? It's like that the United States exports propaganda, and so people abroad know who we are, in a historical sense. They know that we are an oppressed people. They know we are fighting against, this government. At least many of us are. And they know that regardless of what it might look like, that we are a permanent underclass. So why would another group reasonably and rationally choose to come here to align
and be with us? Right. Because I left. If you them, I left us back there.
I left us back there.
Yeah, if I wanted to be us, I could have stayed where I was.
Stayed at home.
Right.
Well, let me ask you, Mike
If
Jones,
we go through all of this madness, I don't understand why we don't. I don't understand why we don't understand.
well, I've actually heard preachers say that you need to come back to the church and struggle with us. That's not that's
No,
not
they don't work like that.
it don't work like that. But anyway,
Oh,
but wrapping up, and I shouldn't say wrapping up. I should say concluding for today. Mike Jones, I want to ask you about solutions in this empire. How should we go about? What are some of the things we need to be doing right now for our
I
betterment?
I think uh uh this would be a Buddhist moment. Fundamentally, they say when the way prevails everywhere, follow the way. When the way prevails nowhere, that means you got to create a way. It requires some kind of internal reflection to decide. So we're at, just as white America is at an inflection point, we're at an inflection point. And we have to learn how to think again for ourselves based on what's in our interest. And we just might have to suffer this moment for some extended time. Part of, and I'll make this quick, one of the things that happens with age, when I was real young and I was thinking about all this stuff, I thought I was Carl Lewis, and it's the 100-meter meters, and I'm gonna win the gold medal. I'm gonna bust the tape. Me personally, our generation, we gonna fix this shit. It'll get done because all them old folks didn't know what they was doing. Then you get a little older and you have an appreciation for what came before you, and you say, okay, it's a relay, but I'm running the anchor leg, and we go close this shit out. And then you get kind of this old, and you realize, yeah, it's a relay, but it ain't the 4x200. It's more like a 2 mile relay or longer. And guess what? I'm running the leg, and it ain't the anchor leg. Okay, so what I got to do is run the best leg I can, and don't screw the hand off the batons exchange.
Don't drop.
That's your job when you running the leg of the relay. Try not to lose no ground. Try to pick up some ground. But whatever you do, don't blow the baton pass. We can't afford to. We ain't got a chance if we drop the baton when we exchange it. So that's kind of where you get past the point where I can't project it because it's gonna be longer than I'm gonna be here. And it's been here long, and it's been longer than I've been here before me. So I don't know, Larry. That's a bad answer, but I don't know.
But I think the answer speaks to the need for perspective. Because again, there's no way, if it's possible at all to kind of right the ship, it's that possibility is predicated on our ability to take the right perspective on the problem. And until we can do that, we continue to literally just kind of like tread water and kind of make up stuff. we make up stuff to kind of calm our nerves.
Charles, that's a great metaphor, I think, what you just said about righting the ship. Because the ship needs righting, but that ain't got nothing to do with the storm. Okay, if we right the ship, the storm we'll still be in a storm.
We'll still be in the storm.
So don't confuse righting the ship with getting out the storm.
Mm-hmm. What say you, Attorney Fields?
Well, I would say, first of all, acknowledge how far we've come.
Absolutely.
We have been in an environment where any white person at all could tell you what to do and to dictate what you're doing. We have ridded ourselves from that. We put in what they call the highest office of the land, someone that's adjacent to us. And so this entire program that we're witnessing now is a reaction to the gains that we've made. Understand the way that pendulums go. Pendulums don't stop in the middle. They go from one extreme to the next. And this is, as Mike Jones put it so exactly, this is a long race. And you're going to have some wins and some losses. And you have to fight and block and tackle the individual in front of you and keep moving. And so collectively, we'll get some gains. We might have a few losses on a few plays, but that's where we need to be. And it's, in my opinion, that the foundation and the predicate, as been stated here today, needs to be adopted. That way, you can see why it doesn't make sense for you to wake up in a place where your water system is totally reliant on someone that doesn't care about you, and you need to become self-actualized in that manner. And your food system needs to be something that you are in control over, and we can begin to make those gains. But the solution is to do exactly what you all have laid out here today. identify the predicate, continue to work towards that, understand that this is a pendulum and we're in a fight, and understand that you're in a fight. You're not going to have gains every round. You're going to go back to the stool some days needing darn near with an 8 count, but you come back out and you keep fighting.
You know something else in closing that we have to also understand and acknowledge as the as a part of the reason why we get what we get is that geographically we don't even know how we are oriented here. And this is kind of consistent with other myths that, other occurrences that become mythical and as opposed to historical. So in this particular case, I'm referring to the Great Migration. The overwhelming number, the majority of Black folks still reside in the Confederacy and never left the Confederacy. And so, yes, there was a huge population shift, from 1910 to 1970. But the majority of Black folks then and now live in the Confederacy. And I think that becomes just another example of how we don't even know where we are in this thing, literally. So mentally, spiritually, or physically, we literally don't know where we are. We don't contemplate the various things that actually impact and affect us. Like when we see stuff about inclement weather in the southern states, flooding and tornadoes and hurricanes, our immediate thought, probably other than Katrina, our immediate thought ain't never been, what about the Black folks in those places? Guarantee you. We don't think about the Black folks who suffer from water damage in St. Louis, let alone somewhere down south. Our context, about how and where we manifest is off, because it does in part get back to that point you made, Larry, with regard to the what you call them politics, those respectability politics. Like we are more concerned with do rags and shower cap, our criticism, pointing our criticism towards that, and that that whole thing about how we can clean up better. More concerned with that than just the realities of where and how we show up otherwise. That too is a rate limiting step for us. And so if we don't have a good sense of how and where we show up in the US, we can't possibly have a connection with any ally external to the US.
And that has to change. You're looking directly in the trap if you just base your existence on what you see here. So I think that is an incredible opportunity to pause between sets. And I want to thank the Mike Jones and the Dr. Charles Alexander and you all for tuning in. And if it's the Lord's will, we shall see you next week on the Level Set.